Thank you for being the only event commemorating the 10th anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution that invited someone like myself, openly gay and communists, the double trouble, to talk about queer politics and the Egyptian revolutionary struggle. Following closely, it is quite remarkable that the 10th anniversary celebrations of the Egyptian uprising, from interviews to roundtables, etc., ignored the whole LGBTQ issue, as if Sarah Ghazi did not die of suicide in exile, as if there are no daily arrests, as if the regime has not used queer issues as a counter-revolutionary weapon, as if Sisi government did not treat us as Western Asian, as if a Mashroua Leila concert did not become the center of a moral panic, as if men were not humiliated live on TV in the Hammam al-Bahri infamous incidents, as if Malak al-Kashif, the trans woman, was not imprisoned in a men's-only prison, as if there are no activists to interview, as if no queers are active in Egyptian politics, as if we don't exist. Again erased, again sidelined, even from those claiming to be on the progressive side. This is the depressing state of affairs today. The speech today is dedicated to the militant dissident, Sarah Ghazi. I would like to take a moment of silence remembering my late friend Sarah Ghazi, who died of suicide in her Canadian exile last June. I miss her a lot. I recall my chats with her about how we are under siege from all sides constantly, how we were betrayed by revolutionary comrades when the state declared we are perverts. Today, I will talk about queer politics in Egypt and how it is positioned within the larger revolutionary struggle. For me, the continued mobilization means raising more and more radical questions. Queer politics for me extends beyond the strictures of just being queer. It is not only about a particular sexual identification. Queer as a challenge to heteronormativity, as a challenge to binarized logic. Queer politics is shaped in Egypt by many aspects of the social political reality that I will try to go into today, not at very extended less because of the time, but we can continue in the discussion. The first aspect of the socio-political reality in Egypt that interact with queer politics is capitalism. Just to set the record straight, there is no possibility of a dignified, just life under capitalism under any condition. For me, queer politics cannot be dissociated from anti-capitalism as a stance against collective exploitation. Without Sarah Ghazi, one of the very few queer communists in Egypt, I feel very lonely in this respect. The questions that face the Egyptian left when Sarah Ghazi and many others in 2017 were arrested as a rainbow flag was raised, which called the Mashroua Leila incidents, still haunts us today. They are foundational to theoretical and practical hurdles facing us today. Does the mantra of the supreme priority of class over identity works today? I mean pure class reduction? Or should we just ignore class in the pursuit of one can call liberal identity sectarianism or woke capitalism in an identity reductionist sense? Are these questions even relevant in Egypt to begin with? The easy answer is to prescribe to either ones. On one side, we were told, hide your identity, still we resolve class struggle. And on the other extreme, we were told, become identitarian subject and do not care about capitalist exploitation or labor relations. Let me take a detour here. The Hammam al-Bahri incident was quite enlightening on this issue. In 2014, Mona al-Iraqi, a TV presenter, filmed live on TV the arrests of men in a traditional hammam in Cairo. They were dragged out of the place in a humiliating fashion on the TV, with insults hurled at them for being AIDS spreaders and perverts. They were acquitted afterwards. One of them committed suicide. The way in which this incident did not get traction like other high-profile incidents in Egypt was remarkable. Looking closely, one finds that the main reason is that those arrested were working class men. They do not even identify as gay. Someone working in an Egyptian LGBTQ organization told me. This incident has particularly pained me, a singular case in which the disdain for working class and the biopolitical control of sexual lives unite hand in hand, revealing that the only lives that matter in Egypt are those who have access to capital or proxies to the capitalist class. The bourgeoisie gays can travel abroad from Pride Parade to another, are shielded, isolated. But to be clear, I hope it is clear to them too, they are also now not safe. I do not like to be called an LGBTQ activist, as you have seen from the introduction. I prefer to be called a political dissident. The label here matters because it does not box one in a particular identification with a particular job description to perform reminiscent of the neoliberalization of the activist sphere. The rise of professional activists has led to fragmentation across struggles in Egypt and have undermined efforts for economical justice primarily. As Sarah Ghazi once told me, I am a proud communist who stands for labor rights and also for sexual minorities not to be scapegoated. A queer person can also be a labor rights activist. Surprise, surprise. Sarah Ghazi has exemplified this in her work with labor movements in Egypt and also in her exile in Canada. It was pretty depressing to see how in Sarah Ghazi's ideology, even local LGBTQ groups systematically omitted the word communist and squeezed in LGBTQ activists, reflecting a total complicity and depoliticization of these groups. When I objected, one of them told me, but isn't being communist contradicts being queer? Wasn't Stalin homophobic, etc., etc.? Quite remarkable how the American anti-communist propaganda has been transplanted in its entirety to Egypt. Sarah was a communist and remained so till her death. We cannot continue without a solidarity with the exploited working class in Egypt. Enough with the cliché that they are somehow eternally, irredeemably homophobic. In Egypt, the neoliberal capitalist class exerts its influence through economical oppression with the help of the military and through regulating the biopolitical sphere of sexual lives with the help of the judicial and religious authorities. The influence has culminated today in what we call the Egyptian family code, an umbrella term to keep the society disciplined. Queers, of course, fall in this category of those who deviate from the Egyptian family code. Capitalist hegemony in Egypt thrives through sexual oppression, but in a place like the United States, capital thrives through sexual liberation and tokenization, reflecting a different relation of the sexual hegemonic form to the capital. Important to mention that in both cases, either oppression or liberation, capitalist relations regulate and mold sexual desires. Raising the rainbow flag in the Egyptian context by Sarah Ghazi and others was an act of sheer dissidence, a singular moment to shake up the biopolitical disciplinary hegemony. In New York City, where I currently live, I would be the first to criticize the raising of the rainbow flag as it symbolized how liberal capitalism regulates sexual identities. Many comrades in Egypt fail to acknowledge these nuances, dismissing queer issues as liberal bourgeoisie decadence. They do not ask themselves why the state is perpetually using us as one of its most lucrative counter-revolutionary weapons. The second aspect of the socio-political realities that interact with queer politics is the post-colonial specter. And this more for those of us who are living abroad. Joseph Massad has been one of the key figures in putting forward a blanket notion of the gay international, reconstituting us queers as imperialist brigades, trying to force unauthentic morality onto Egypt, portraying us as Western Egypt. And ridiculously enough, it is in a way mirroring the same tactics that Sisi regime is using to vilify us. I will not provide here a detailed critique of Massad's book, Desiring Arab, as it merits a whole lecture by itself, but I will highlight some of the repercussions of the discourse emanating from it. In the words of those who adopt this post-colonial critique for LGBTQ politics, we are inciting Egyptian society to discourse as if we should be clinging to some pre-modern, pre-discursive sexuality. Engaging in exercises of nostalgia, they remind me of the Islamist dreams of the return to Andalusia, to some lost past, to some reconstituted history. In casting a white net over any talk of LGBTQ rights as imperialist, those post-colonial academics are denying us our basic agency and are involved aggressively in reverse colonialism, where they want us to adopt some imagined authentic identity that often mirrors the Orientalist fantasies of Arab men's sexuality. These are not just theoretical or academic discussions, but ones that has tangible repercussions. While many of them are enjoying their lives at the heart of the empire, for example, in New York City, they are patronizing over how queers in the Middle East should and should not be. When one of them declares that Sarah Ghazi was killed by the Gay International, we have crossed a line here, where their obsessive hate for anything Western or modern have led them to cover up or be complicit with the crimes of Sisi's regime as an act of regaining some lost authenticity against the West. This is just one example. I have so many. What has begun as a legitimate critique of empire has turned today into a culturalist endeavor, deviating far away from an emancipatory project centered on critique of capitalism and different forms of emergent neocolonialities. Far removed from material realities, it turned into a cultural warfare. The third aspect of the social political reality that interacts with queer politics is Islam. By Islam here, I refer to the social, cultural, and religious dimensions constituting a majoritarian identity in Asia. Queer Islam that has spread across the West for very understandable reasons, as Muslims in the West are a minority trying to integrate their minoritarian identities into societies that are largely hostile to them. When queer Islam is being exported to Egypt, for example, by some groups within the Egyptian LGBTQ community, translating texts for a French queer imam or another American one, those concepts crossing borders are not valid for a Muslim majority country, in my opinion. As queer Islam travels from its origins in the West to the Middle East, its conceptual basis loses its material precondition for existence. In the Egyptian society where Islamic jurisprudence is one of the major sources of oppressive governmentality, hand in hand with the military dictatorship, it's difficult to imagine how queer Islam will even pan out. Not to say it's impossible, but it will not take the same Western or liberal form. I'm always wary of the word reform. Sisi talks obsessively of Islamic reforms, but this is an empty performance signaling to his Western allies that he is some kind of a secular leader, while in reality, he is espousing an ultra-conservative totalitarian Islamic agenda, and I wonder why the Islamists don't like him. Maybe our priority should be first to dismantle the corrupt religious authority, then have those debates, which are not practically possible today. There are strong rifts within the Egyptian queer community about the issue of religion. And I have to say, I feel a great discomfort with queers allying themselves explicitly or implicitly with a religious and social force that keep us alienated, self-hating, perpetually oppressed. Not to say that religious queers should be pushed away, but we should be wary of who we ally ourselves with. And needless to say, of course, that Islamists across the board, from Salafi to Muslim Brotherhood to moderates, whatever this means, a moderate Islamist, have constantly vilified us and incited violence and death against many of us. When there is a massive wave of arrests to members of the LGBTQ community, this is one of the rare moments that Islamists fully ally with Sisi's regime, asking him to ensure that proper Islamic morality is enforced, even if we stand against their oppression of this by the state. Sounds frustrating, but it should not come as a surprise at all. Islamists cannot be considered socially progressive at any level. And to many US academics who always forgot that Islamists are by definition right-wingers. Also, one of the few moments Coptic and Islamic authorities ally is the witch hunt against queers, spreading moral panic that the moral fabric of the Egyptian society is collapsing. No wonder the Coptic Church is sponsoring today gay conversion therapy, a long discredited and torturous practice, which unfortunately is spreading at a very fast pace in Egypt. In 2018, they even sponsored a conference called Volcano of Homosexuality. Also, many religious psychiatrists, both Muslims and Christians, traveled to the United States to get training from evangelical Christian gay conversion therapists. A Christian evangelical Coptic Muslim alliance against moral perversion, turning the life of many queers in Egypt into an actual living hell. The fourth aspect of the socio-political reality is NGOs, both local and international. In many ways, the only time we are actually constituted as subjects in Egypt is when local human rights organization gives us some bureaucratic status, sending lawyers, preparing reports, etc. When it comes to international NGOs, the question of representation comes at the forefront. Can I speak on behalf of a community? I remember when I contacted Outright International, a major US-based LGBTQ rights organization, to propose a project concerning Egypt. And I was told to discuss it with the country representatives. This is like a veiled take permission. Gatekeeping, profit-seeking, status signaling, and career advancements has turned these NGOs into mini corporations that by definition will not advance a revolutionary endeavor. As I'm speaking to an American audience today, you might be wondering how you can help. As the Biden administration declared that international LGBTQ rights is one of its priorities, we should insist and pressure them not to dissociate this from the question of militarization and wider oppression in Egypt. Sisi regime is already spreading the gossips that Biden will send his gay international brigades to pervert Egyptian society. The way to go about this is to exert pressure on the Egyptian regime by slashing down or totally cutting down the military aid to Egypt that does not benefit the general public, but rather emboldens the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. It should not stop there, but sanctions should be imposed over those who have been involved in tortures and other violations. Do I like this type of foreign pressure? Of course not. But what other options did the Sisi regime leave for us? Internationalization of the struggle and transnational solidarity, especially in places that offer military and financial support to the current regime, such as Germany, France, and United States, is key today. First, because many activists live in exile. And second, because the current Sisi regime is emboldened by many Western powers and lobbyists. The war against the Sisi regime has to be internationalized. I have just elaborated on these four aspects of the Egyptian socio-political reality and its relation to queer politics. Just to conclude, as there is no God up there in the skies to save us at all, we have no choice other than continuing to mobilize to end capitalist barbarism, military dictatorship, and religious authoritarianism in Egypt and beyond. Despite all odds, I'm hopeful. Thank you.